as others have already noted, I mean, our two-way investment relationship is small. At the end of 2009, the total stock of Australian investment in Indonesia was $4.8 billion, $3.1 billion of which is foreign direct investment. However, this accounts for less than 0.5% of Australia's stock of investment abroad and makes Indonesia around our 20th largest destination for investment abroad. Indonesia accounted for about 13% of Australia's investment into ASEAN as at the end of 2009, which in itself is small. ASEAN only attracted 3% of Australia's investment abroad. And that's in contrast to, let's just use one example, and that is of the European Union, the EU, which accounted for more than 30% of Australia's investment abroad. So it's just a very interesting point here to note that although the EU is just as big for Australia's trade as our trade with ASEAN, there is a significant difference when it comes to the issue of foreign investment with these two regions. Now, I don't have time this morning to go through the correlation between trade and investment and what normally happens, and I have not done a PhD in economics, but I do have an honours degree in economics. And we will be discussing a lot more of this in the process of our engagement through the CEPA process. But you would expect the investment to follow the trade. Now, very briefly, in terms of Indonesia's investment in Australia, Indonesia is a small investor in Australia. In 2009, its total stock of investment was around $339 million, making it Australia's 32nd largest investor. And Indonesian investment in Australia accounts for less than 1% of the investment we receive from ASEAN. Very briefly now, in terms of the CEPA negotiations, the message here is there appears to be potential for our trade and investment relationship to better reflect the size of our economies and the closeness of our bilateral and geographic relationship. As others have noted, Prime Minister Gillard and President Yudhoyono's agreement to commence negotiations toward an Indonesia-Australia Comprehensive Economic Partnership Agreement paves the way to capitalise on the inherent strengths of our bilateral relationship, the size of our economies, and our geographical place in the world. Both leaders expressed their satisfaction with the report of the joint feasibility study on an Australia-Indonesia free trade agreement and agreed to progress to a comprehensive economic partnership covering economic cooperation, trade and investment issues, which would further contribute to building a higher level and mutually beneficial economic partnership between Indonesia and Australia. The CEPA negotiations will take into account the ASEAN Australia-New Zealand FTA and the Australia-Indonesia FTA joint feasibility study released in April 2009. I would now like to focus briefly on Australia's and Indonesia's commitments under that ASEAN Australia-New Zealand FTA, since these will provide the baseline on which CEPA will build. AIBC was signed by ministers on 27 February 2009 and entered into force on 1 January 2010. We are expecting AIBC to enter into force for Indonesia in the very near future. The agreement will enter into force for Indonesia 60 days after the date of its notification to the AIBC parties of completion of its domestic procedures. Advice on the timing of entry into force for AIBC for Indonesia will be announced at that time. When Indonesia becomes an AIBC party, the agreement will be in force for all 12 signatory countries. That is, each and every member of ASEAN, Australia and New Zealand. Now, under AIBC, Indonesia has committed to eliminate duties on 93.2% of its tariff lines by 2025. This covers 93.4% of Australia's current exports. Australia has committed to eliminate complete tariff elimination by 2020. That's 1 minute left, is it? Right. Time flew, but that's fine. I'll have to move quickly through this. Just simply to note that Australia's services suppliers will benefit from greater certainty and transparency through WTO plus services commitments by Indonesia in a range of sectors. AIBC will also enhance transparency and certainty for Australian investors in the region through a regime of post-establishment investment protections. And there are useful commitments on intellectual property and competition. AIBC is Australia's first FTA to establish a framework for trade and investment-related cooperation. An economic cooperation work program is being implemented over 5 years following AIBC's entry into force last year. This allows for the provision of technical assistance and capacity building to developing ASEAN countries to assist in implementation of the FTA. Next steps. We welcome and we very much input, industry input, other stakeholder input to the CEPA negotiations, and we've already received a number of thought-provoking submissions. We've received some weighty submissions. We've received some very succinct submissions of 1 paragraph identifying an issue. We welcome all sorts of submissions. We encourage it. We want your input, and we initially called for submissions. This is the Department of Foreign Affairs and Trade by 18 February, but we're keen to continue to receive further submissions. And we're very interested in receiving the submissions and inputs covering goods and services trade, investment and economic cooperation issues. I did want to say a few words about economic cooperation, but I might come back to that in the Q&A because I know Harry has got a very important presentation to make. Suffice to say that we're now at the pre-negotiation consultation phase. I mean, I think that was Harry's formulation, and it's brilliant. It's a very bureaucratic formulation, and I like it. So we're still in the pre-negotiation consultation phase, and I'm feeling at the moment comfortable. As I think you are, Harry. But we're going to move into more substantive phases, and we want to move in those phases with you, and I'm encouraging further government-to-business engagement, as well as, of course, the government-to-government engagement and the business-to-business engagement. My final one, Leith, conclusion. AIBC provides a platform for Australia's deeper economic integration with the ASEAN region over time. This is achieved not only through significant tariff commitments and regional rules of origin, but also through the built-in agendas and AIBC's institutional arrangements, and including the committee structures. Negotiations towards an Indonesia-Australia Comprehensive Economic Partnership Agreement represents a further step towards realising the potential of our bilateral economic relationship. Building on AIBC, the CEPA should create dynamic opportunities for Australian and Indonesian exporters, importers and investors, and bring our two nations closer through enhanced economic engagement and partnership. Thank you very much.